What does it feel like to have all these people saying that you are washed up?
They must be new around here.
In the history of the UFC, one fighter has struck fear into the hearts of opponents like no other. El Cucuy, Tony Ferguson. He wasn't just another fighter. No, he was the boogeyman of his division.
If this was a scary movie, Tony Ferguson would be that guy.
He's El Cucuy.
Yeah.
El Cucuy was the embodiment of terror. But what happened to this terrifying force of nature? From having the longest win streak in lightweight history to the longest losing streak, Tony's downfall was just as terrifying as his rise. But before we discuss what happened to Tony, let's rewind and see where Tony came from. His story began with a bit of mystery surrounding his biological father. He wasn't in the picture, but shortly after Tony was born, his mother married a Scottish-American man named Armand Ferguson. Tony took his stepdad's last name and played a significant role in his life, guiding him as he grew up on a farm in Michigan. Life wasn't easy for Tony. He endured hard labor and isolation and was often the victim of extreme bullying. All of this led him to find peace in sports, particularly boxing. Inspired by legends like Fernando Vargas and Oscar de la Hoya, Tony pursued his dream relentlessly. He excelled in wrestling and football, finding purpose and meaning in the competition. Tony dropped out of college and found himself working as a bartender. While his love for sports never dwindled, he slowly drifted away from the dreams he once held dear. But fate had other plans for him. One night while working a bar shift, a guy noticed Ferguson's cauliflower ear and discussed his wrestling background. That guy was a trainer at a local MMA gym and invited him to work with some young mixed martial artists on their wrestling. Shortly after this, Tony decided to pursue MMA as a career. Once Ferguson's career started taking off, he applied to compete in the UFC reality series The Ultimate Fighter multiple times. Despite not knowing much about the show, Tony was eager to try out. He was rejected multiple times. However, undeterred by the rejections, Tony kept applying. He didn't give up. He applied for the show a third time, refusing to take no for an answer. Fighting was in his blood, and he knew he belonged in the octagon. In 2010, he was finally accepted to compete in season 13 of the series and was picked by Brock Lesnar for his team.
This kid, I think, is the guy that could possibly win the show.
Despite going through a tear on the show, Tony's personal demons began to emerge, something that would become synonymous with his career. Tony has struggled with alcohol and anger issues, which have caused concern among those around him.
Tony,
Look at me.
be nice.
Look at me. Get the off of me! Shake my hand and we're good. You don't want to be good, then let's go.
His behavior when intoxicated can be aggressive and confrontational, leading to strained relationships and lost respect from peers. Despite this, Tony maintains that his actions are his own choice, and he knows the consequences they may bring. He admits to bottling up many emotions, using the octagon as a battleground to release them. Every fight becomes a cathartic experience where he leaves it all on the line. Now, after winning the Ultimate Fighter, Tony faced another setback. Allegedly, he experienced a mental breakdown and was removed from a fight due to an outburst. This led to a hospital visit and prescription medication, indicating a deeper struggle with mental health, more than just his alcohol problem. Despite these challenges, Tony finds love and marries his now wife, Christina Servin, in 2012. The period following their marriage coincides with his rise in the UFC, which made his fans believe his demons were finally behind him, and the El Cucuy was ready to fly as high as the eagle. During his rise, Tony was a freak of nature. Described as an animal by fellow fighters, Tony's intensity knows no bounds. He trained for hours on end and displayed a level of dedication that bordered on insanity. His endurance and resilience were so unmatched that many questioned whether he even felt pain. In 2015, a highly anticipated fight between Tony Ferguson and Khabib Nurmagomedov was on the cards. But unfortunately, Khabib's injury forced him out of the fight, leading to a 2-year hiatus. During this time, Tony and his wife Christina welcomed their first child. A second fight between Tony and Khabib was scheduled in 2016, but this time it was Tony who had to withdraw. Khabib expressed his disappointment, but was still eager to face Tony in the octagon finally. However, during all of the chaos, another contender emerged onto the scene, Conor McGregor. After winning the featherweight title, McGregor set his sights on the lightweight division. He skipped the line and knocked out Eddie Alvarez to win the belt Tony and Khabib were supposed to be contending for. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, he left the entire division in limbo when he decided to pursue a boxing money match with Floyd Mayweather instead of defending his lightweight crown. With McGregor's attention elsewhere, Khabib versus Tony was still the fight to make and a fight that everyone wanted to see. Despite multiple attempts to schedule the fight, setbacks plagued Tony and Khabib. In 2017, the two were set to fight for the interim title. However, just when it seemed like a third time was the charm, disaster struck. Tony received the devastating news that Khabib had been hospitalized due to illness.
Khabib Nurmagomedov has been medically unfit. He has not been cleared to fight.
This led to a third straight cancellation of a fight between Tony and Khabib. As Tony grappled with the disappointment, the UFC replaced Khabib with Kevin Lee. Tony went on to win the interim belt, but the rivalry with Khabib was far from over. Instead, it got more heated as the time went on. Despite not coming to fruition for the last 3 times, fans still wanted to see these two lightweight juggernauts fight for the gold. The UFC listened and scheduled the bout for the 4th time at UFC 223. This time for the undisputed lightweight title. Again, everything seemed set, but disaster struck. Yes, again. News had broke that Tony had suffered a severe injury while performing some media obligation, threatening to derail the highly anticipated fight. The funny thing was, this all happened on the 1st of April, so naturally everyone was skeptical of the injury being real. However, despite the initial disbelief surrounding the timing of the injury, it soon became clear that Tony's setback was all too real. What happened was Tony tripped over a cable during a routine interview, which led him to tear his ACL completely. As Tony was sidelined with this gruesome injury, Khabib continued his quest for the belt. Khabib managed to win the title at UFC 223. However, what happened before the fight is what caught everyone's attention. Conor McGregor attacked Khabib and his team during fight week, throwing a dolly at their bus. Now, naturally, this set up the next fight between McGregor and Khabib, one that is still the biggest fight in UFC history. However, this all meant that Tony was skipped over by Conor once again. The UFC decided to move forward without Tony and stripped him of his interim title. The news was a bitter blow for Tony, who had worked tirelessly to earn his place at the top of the UFC ranks.
Took my belt, they took a bunch of zeros from my paycheck. How do you think I feel?
It was only natural to assume that Tony would be in a dark state after suffering a freak accident and losing his interim title and opportunity to compete for the undisputed gold. Tony's wife Christina revealed disturbing details about Tony's behavior, especially after he injured his knee. She described how Tony's drinking escalated during that time and how he started becoming paranoid and had delusional beliefs. Tony's behavior became increasingly erratic. He used to wake Christina and their son in the middle of the night, claiming they were in danger due to an impending flood caused by a lunar eclipse. Tony's paranoia even led him to purchase a life raft and take his family on a drive inland, convinced they needed to escape. As his mental state deteriorated, Tony's delusions worsened. He accused Christina of being a witch and exhibited signs of psychosis. He unplugged appliances, tore apart furniture, and even believed his son's food was poisoned. Christina recounted Tony's use of holy water and his belief that there were cameras and computer chips implanted in their home and his body. Despite Christina's efforts to seek help for Tony, he refused to acknowledge his deteriorating mental health.
We've been trying all year for him to get help, and he refuses.
Christina's concern for Tony's well-being led her to seek assistance from emergency services. She recounted Tony's bizarre behavior to the dispatcher, expressing her fear and uncertainty about their safety. Despite not being physically harmed, Christina's distress over Tony's mental state was evident.
Did he hurt you or your children?
No.
No, you're okay.
Doing really just random stuff.
After obtaining a restraining order against Tony, Christina released a statement acknowledging his struggles while emphasizing his role as a loving husband and father. She expressed hope that the legal proceedings would facilitate Tony's access to the help that he desperately needed to overcome his challenges.
The hype is real. You better be there, Khabib.
Despite all of his physical injuries and mental health issues, Tony made a quick turnaround, and on the same card, Khabib defended his title against Conor McGregor. Tony made his return from injury, and the two were set on a collision course once again. They were scheduled to face each other for a 5th time at UFC 249. Just when the fight fans thought that they'd finally see these two lightweight colossus clash, the entire world shut down at the 5th time of asking. The pandemic hit, and Khabib was stuck in Russia, unable to fly to the US for Fight Week. Despite the world being in complete chaos, UFC was the first show to get back on air. Tony was still set to headline the card, but this time against Justin Gaethje. And this is when the fall of El Cucuy began. Despite having no obligation to accept the fight, Tony agreed to fight Gaethje, saving yet another UFC card. However, Justin battered him throughout 5 rounds and showcased a side of Tony Ferguson that no one had ever seen before. He absorbed over 100 punches before the referee mercifully stepped in and stopped the fight. Following his defeat at UFC 249, Tony Ferguson's career took a sharp downward turn. Matchups against Charles Oliveira and Beneil Dariush proved to be unfavorable for Tony, leading to consecutive losses. However, his knockout loss to Michael Chandler signaled a significant turning point in his career. In his subsequent fights against Nate Diaz and Bobby Green, Tony appeared a shadow of his former self, failing to showcase the resilience and durability that once defined him as a fighter. Gone were the days of the boogeyman. Now, he was just a stepping stone. Despite his best efforts to adapt and train with renowned figures like David Goggins, Tony's losing streak continued, culminating in a record-tying 7th consecutive loss. As critics and fellow fighters voiced concerns about his future in the sport, Tony Ferguson grappled with the harsh realities of aging and declining athleticism. As they say, Father Time is always undefeated. Despite once being considered one of the greatest lightweights of all time, Tony's unorthodox fighting style and reliance on endurance were no match for the toll of time. Despite the tragic and truly saddening downfall he's had, there is no denying the legacy of El Cucuy. Even if he never got to be the undisputed champion or face Khabib in the octagon, Tony still remains a fan favorite because of all that he has done for the sport.